welcome everyone to the sixth installment of the LiveStore office hours. I remember the last one was in September, 3 months ago. Kind of felt like yesterday. Was hoping at this point to have already released LiveStore 0.4, but not quite. But we're closer than ever and have a lot of exciting updates to share. So just in case you're new to this, I'm Johannes Schickling. I'm based here in Berlin. I've been working on LiveStore for like close to 5 years now. I'm doing this under the umbrella of Over Engineering Studio, which is a product studio where I do open source research, for example, on LiveStore, but I'm also building products on top of LiveStore. And you might also know me as the founder of Prisma or the host of Local First FM. So if you're new to LiveStore, in a nutshell, it is a client-centric local first data layer based on event sourcing and reactive SQLite. What that means, it is a foundation for your app to build like data stuff on top. So it replaces traditional state management systems like Redux, Showtie, etc., but also replace like an API layer and database layer, giving you a new approach that is event sourcing based, like mostly oriented around user-centric applications. And it was very important for me that it's like super fast. It supports flexible syncing, like Git-inspired syncing out of the box, has great developer experience, and it's really pluggable. So it comes with platform adapters for web, Expo, Node, has different sync backend implementations, integrates with a bunch of different frameworks. So very excited about that. In a nutshell, it looks like this, that you have various clients. Those clients in a Redux kind of way have events that get, unlike Redux, materialized into a SQLite database, which you then can reactively query that drives your UI. And similar to Git, you have push and pull for your data through events. And that's how all the clients communicate. So that's LiveStore in a nutshell. If you want to like learn more about it in a slightly longer version, I've recently given a talk at the VietConf in Amsterdam, which you can watch here on YouTube. But let's dive into today's agenda. I have prepared a update on version 0.4. Which I'll go through in a moment. But I'm also very delighted to have 4 people with us here. One asleep. Victor is currently not here as he is based in Australia and currently sleeping. But also here from Australia, we have Sam Goodwin, who is not yet sleeping. Thank you so much for making this happen. We should have really maybe scheduled this in a different way. So both of you could have been asleep, but we do that next time. Then we also have Igor here back. He's giving us an update on new React API. And we have my friend Nicholas Burke here, who's been working on the LiveStore docs, particularly new tutorial. So I'm very excited about hearing about all of those today. I have prepared a few shoutouts for community showcase, and I also want to share a bit of light on some ongoing contributions and some ongoing research topics. And if we have enough time, then we have time for some open question and answers. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the 0.4 release update. And I want to start with this. Like once in a while, I look at like other projects and I look at the contribution graphs to get sort of like a sense for the health of the project. And so I've now like today opened that view for the LiveStore repo, and I was kind of astonished to see like how this year kind of like felt dramatically different compared to the years before. I've mentioned I've been working on this now for over 5 years at this point. But I think one thing that really dramatically changed things this year, like a little bit later into the year, we've like open sourced the project, but already at this point, coding agents happened. And that has really like significantly changed my velocity and abilities. And later we have also seen more and more contributions from other people than me. For example, Igor has significantly contributed. So I'm just very excited about this. Like the velocity and momentum of the project is like something I'm really, really happy about. And yeah, I'll dive into the various topics in 0.4 in a moment. There's a pending PR for the main branch where you can see a lot of like changed files, like GitHub has given up on counting them at this point. A lot of like lines of code changes. I guess a bunch of that is like example code, etc. But it really feels like this is like another major version of LiveStore, as we almost touched every part of the code base and made things dramatically better. So let me walk through like some of the high level changes that I'm most excited about, that give you a good sense of like what's coming up with version 0.5, 0.4. One thing that just landed a couple of days ago, after I got to hang out with Rich Harris in New York, and we hacked on this API in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, and managed to push it over the finish line. And I'm very, very excited what we are able to land here. The Svelte integration for LiveStore, I think, has been the most upvoted GitHub issue that exists in the LiveStore repo. I think the simplest way to use LiveStore in any framework, and yet it's reactive. Like here you can basically, that's the simplest way how you can query a LiveStore instance, and you don't even need to use like a hook or something. All of that is kind of absorbed by the Svelte integration itself. And very excited about this brilliant idea that Rich came up with, based also on the work of Elliot, who presented this a little bit earlier. And I think we'll have Rich on in a future version, in a future office hours, to run us through a live demo. So very excited about this, and this is actually now something that's ready to be used. Next up, we covered that quite extensively, and apologies here, I ran out of time preparing my slides, but we covered that extensively the last time already. I just wanted to recap what we're able to improve for the Cloudflare, both the improved sync provider and as well as the client adapter. For the sync provider, we now like are fully compatible with both like all kinds of storage mechanisms that exist in the Cloudflare ecosystem, whether that is a D1 for an addressable SQLite or the embedded SQLite database for a durable object. And you can now talk to your sync provider via WebSocket, but also through HTTP, and even talk to it directly from other durable objects. So very happy about that. Client adapter, like watch the last version of the office hours if you're curious to learn more about in depth there. But the core gist is that you, as LiveStore is client centric, where you build a client app, for example, a React app, now you can also have a LiveStore client running on a Cloudflare durable object, for example, acting as an agent, and all collaborate on the same synced store, which is super exciting. We have a new sync backend implementation as well, based on S2. S2 is a super exciting new service and technology. I'm even wearing the hat today, which gives you streams as a building block. Streams always kind of like conceptually existed, but they were never really like, maybe besides Kafka, etc. But like they always felt like way too bulky and like way too enterprise. And S2 is making that like much more approachable, very lightweight, very fast to work with. And you can now use S2 as a sync backend for LiveStore, and as like it just works. It's been super fast and a pleasure to work with, and those folks are building really cool technology. Next up, a bunch of improvements to the LiveStore DevTools. For example, the entire like database browser has gotten an overhaul. Now also supports client documents better, just handles various kind of like embedded schemas better, etc. So all of that should feel a lot smoother. The sync system, the sync overview has been improved. In the events section, you can actually now manually commit events through the DevTools, which can be really nice for debugging, etc. And just like fixed a lot of little issues here. So hopefully that's a nice quality of life improvement. Then next up, now you can pass in a effects schema as a definition foundation for a SQLite table. So the old way of defining it still works. So you can use either or. But if you're effect pilled like me, or increasing amount of people in the LiveStore community, you can now like define your effect schema like this and just pass it in, and then the entire table is derived from that with automatic migrations, etc. This is something I've mentioned before in the slide here. What gave me this velocity is coding agents. And I think this should be even more pronounced when you're building like with LiveStore, if you're building apps with LiveStore. So it is really important to me that like we actually improve the way how coding agents can build with LiveStore. Lee Robinson has written a really great blog post about like how he's thinking about docs, how they're structuring it, for example, for Cursor. And here in like the last chapter of his blog post, he lays out a couple of like best practices. Not all of them are yet adopted and embraced by LiveStore, but quite a lot already. So this is something that I just like shipped a couple of days ago. So the LiveStore package on NPM now actually ships with a full version of the docs as Markdown, which your coding agent now has a way easier time just like discovering and like reading. And also JS doc coverage is getting better and better, which helps coding agents a lot. LiveStore now also has a MCP server, so which you can run locally and use a couple of tools. Among others, you can actually interact. You can, through your coding agent, interact with a LiveStore system in order to simulate other clients. So you can do very cool things like in, let's say we're building this linear light app, you could simulate saying like, hey, please port over all issues from this other repo here. And the coding agent would just like fetch all of that and ingest it into your LiveStore system. That's possible through the MCP, but the MCP also gives you access to docs, etc. And given there's some controversies around MCP, the same thing is also possible through a LiveStore CLI. And additionally, the LiveStore docs can now be also accessed directly through curl, which returns Markdown as opposed to fully rendered HTML, which makes life for your coding agents a lot better. So very excited about this. And if you have ideas how to improve the situation for coding agents with LiveStore, please let me know. I'm very eager to improve those things. Next up, docs themselves. We're going to hear more about the brand new tutorial in a moment from Nicholas, but I'm very excited about this. Like we have now like multiple chapters that walks you through like step by step how you set everything up, how you can deploy it to Cloudflare, how like you read data, write data with LiveStore, how you set up syncing on Cloudflare, etc. So really excited about that, and we're gonna hear more about that from Nicholas. Overall, docs coverage has been dramatically improved. Hopefully you didn't find too many to-dos in the past in the LiveStore docs. Those were like my intentions to at least create a placeholder page that we would later fill in. And we've been making a lot of progress on that. And by we, I also mean many of you who've been contributing to LiveStore, which I really appreciate. We've been also improving the LiveStore docs infra quite significantly. One thing that kind of gets tricky when you write more and more docs is to make sure that things are up to date. Coding agents help with that. But one critical part about this is still like relying on tooling such as the TypeScript compiler. And now we're like getting to a place where we're basically type checking all of the snippets that are embedded in LiveStore, which allows you to have just much more trust in them and makes it easier for us to maintain it. Then I'm also a huge fan of just like visual understanding of more complex concepts, and for that we're now also have more and more diagrams throughout docs, which is also really nice to work with actually now, because you can now use Mermaid, you can use a thing called D2, and you can also use TLDraw files which automatically get compiled. So all of that should hopefully make it easier for you and your coding agents to work with LiveStore and understand it. And there's a lot more examples. So moving on, from this. If you are like super eager and don't just want to use LiveStore, but actually contribute to it, that is also getting a lot better. I have worked with a lot of like early contributors to kind of understand, hey, where are their friction points? And one giant hurdle for sure is learning effect. But I think this is a double-edged sword. It is a bit of like a barrier to entry for people who want to contribute to LiveStore, particularly to the implementation of LiveStore. However, I think it's also a fantastic opportunity for you to learn effect this way, as like I think more and more things are well documented. You can use coding agents, and effect really shines in the way how LiveStore uses it, because there you have just like so many hard problems all at once. You have like complex error handling, you have stream handling, you have a lot of concurrency, you have multi-threading, etc. So if you're thinking about like deepening your effect understanding, studying the LiveStore code base might actually be very interesting. So, and that should get a lot more approachable now, as we're kind of improving the code base itself to be more intuitive, better documented. Also, we have just way more tests now, which overall builds much more confidence in LiveStore actually working as intended, and particularly also helping coding agents with that work. We now have dedicated contributor docs. We have a dedicated CLI for internal workflows, which both helps contributors as well as agents. And to break things less over time, we've invested a lot of time in improved CI. So, hopefully this makes life a lot easier for existing contributors and future contributors. And with that, I'll move on to our sessions today, but please give this a try. I think many of you are already using it for your app already, where you've upgraded from 0.3 to 0.4 in the dev version. If you're interested in getting like a full view on like everything that's coming up in LiveStore, please check out the changelog. With this, the last point I'll say is, during the last office hours, I said maybe it's going to release around September. Clearly that hasn't happened yet, but I think we're very close. So please continue to use it and provide feedback if you're running into any issues. And with that, we'll move on to the community presentations. And with that, I would love to welcome Sam from Australia working on Alchemy to the stage.
Today I'll demo how to deploy a LiveStore single-page application with Alchemy instead of Wrangler. So let's start with the LiveStore template. Let's open up our IDE. We'll install all of the dependencies. Now we'll install Alchemy and the Cloudflare Vite plugin. And we're ready to get started. Now, the LiveStore template is a single-page application, a Vite single-page application deployed with Wrangler. So we have this Wrangler TOML, and we have this Vite config with this logic to run Wrangler, so to run for local development. We're going to replace all that with Alchemy. Alchemy is an infrastructure as code tool built in pure TypeScript with pure async functions. So the way we get started is we just create an Alchemy run TS file and import Alchemy and create an application. So our app, let's call it LiveStore. And finally, we'll finalize the application. In between here is where we create our resources. We're going to need a worker for our application, a D1 database, and a durable object. To do that, we'll import the Vite helper resource from Alchemy/Cloudflare, and we'll create the worker. So export const our website equals, and now we just simply call this as a function. Vite takes an ID, so it's our website, and now we need to configure some properties. So we need the entry point to the worker. The LiveStore template has this WebSocket durable object and this worker here, so we just take that file path. Luckily, it's here in the Wrangler TOML. We also need to configure where the assets will be. So they're going to be in dist/client. When we run vite build, it's going to output some static assets there. And we also need to set up compatibility with Node. Now we have our worker, we need to create the other resources and bind them to it. So let's create a database. So that'll be await D1 database. We'll import that from Alchemy Cloudflare. Let's call it the DB. And we'll also create our WebSocket server. So that's going to just be durable object namespace. We give it a name. And we configure the class name. So this class name is WebSocket server, and that's because of this class here. Now we can just simply bind them to our worker. So we could put the DB there and put the WebSocket server as well. The final missing piece is we'll need the URL to the back end to give to the front end. So that's this vite LiveStore sync URL. And we can get a reference to that by one final binding of binding it to the worker dev URL. So whatever ends up being created of workers.dev will be put in here as a binding for both the vite build process, but also your worker running in Cloudflare. Next up, we need to modify our vite config. Let's remove all of this Wrangler logic and import the Alchemy Cloudflare vite plugin. This is a nice little helper that streamlines the build and deployment of a vite application to Cloudflare. Now that we have that set up, let's run Alchemy dev. So this will emulate everything locally in Miniflare. There we go. There's our LiveStore. Let's add some items. We can see the logs showing up in the terminal. We can change the state. We can load this up in another browser, update the state, and you can see that it's all working. Cool. Now let's actually deploy it to Cloudflare. But before we do that, I will want to see the URL that's going to be created because I don't know what it is yet. So let's just console log website.url. Now we'll run bun alchemy deploy to actually create all the resources in the cloud. So this time it'll create the D1 and the Cloudflare worker for real. You can see that it's building the vite application, creating all the static assets. Now it's creating the worker with the bindings. And here's our URL. So let's load it up. This one's actually running in Cloudflare. You can see by the workers.dev URL. Let's add some items. Let's take a link to it. Maybe pull that over there. See that it's syncing. This is syncing for real. Awesome. So now the final step we'll do is we'll just destroy the application. So with bun alchemy destroy, we could just delete all those resources and have a nice clean state. And that's it. If you want to learn more, come to alchemy.run. We have a support for almost all Cloudflare resources that you could need, plus many others like Neon, PlanetScale, Stripe, things like that.
I'm very excited to get my hands on Alchemy, and I think we'll have a follow-up conversation soon about how you're using effect for great effect for the future of Alchemy. But with that, I'll be moving on and hand over the stage to Victor, who is currently also in Australia but is currently sleeping. So he has prepared a little video that I will share with you here. We will listen to for a few minutes to hear what Victor has been working on, which is a highly requested feature in.
Hello, my name is Victor. Hannes asked me to record a little video showcasing the work we've been doing on the LiveStore event streaming API. I'm going to show a little bit where we are at the moment, what the potential use case for this functionality can be, as well a little bit short about my journey of contributing to LiveStore. So I first got interested in it because I was writing an artwork management app for visual artists and interested in the benefits from Local First, found LiveStore through Local First FM. And then once I got access to the LiveStore, I think it was a private beta, I began by actually contributing support for Vue. So it's currently in a different separate repository because I use Vue mostly for writing my web apps. And then helping a bit with documentation as well in relation to that. And I got into event streaming because I was interested, or I'm working on solutions for syncing files using LiveStore as the sync engine, a package that kind of lives on top of LiveStore, but uses LiveStore to actually handle the syncing. But then some actions need to be taken on certain events. And then I found they're not yet implemented yet in LiveStore. And Johannes suggested I have a look at a PR that he had already started. He said it would take him a couple of days, and that was, I think, 3 weeks ago now. But it's been an extremely enjoyable process. I've found it extremely enjoyable working on this kind of problem space and learning more about effect. LiveStore, I think the one thing I could say to round this off is that when you're building an application that uses LiveStore, contributing a bit and getting a bit better understanding of like how it works under the hood can be extremely useful for actually feeling more in tune with what's going on, like in terms of it's not like it's a common CRUD server client database. Understanding how it works takes away some of the kind of fear of using it in a real application because you actually have a better understanding, a better grasp of how it functions. So what we're seeing here is a performance streaming test app, which I found very useful developing this feature. Here we have 10,000 events loaded into LiveStore, and if we start streaming them, we get 10,000 in about 2.5 seconds. So this is when everything is synced. Currently, we only support sync streaming events that are confirmed by the sync backend. In the future, we want to support also on a session and leader level, but that requires some careful consideration on how to handle rebasing. So this is like our first approach at it. Now, if we reset the harness, and so now we have nothing, and we start the event stream, and then we start seeding 500, we'll see that it goes quite slow in the beginning. That's because it's a lot of events at the time, and it's being pushed to the sync backend. And at this point, when it goes still faster but still slow, it's when they are being confirmed by the sync backend. And we can actually see that if we look at the Grafana graph here, we can see, okay, here they're being pushed to the sync backend, and here they're slowly being confirmed. It happens a bit in parallel, but generally that's what's going on. So it's only when you try to really push it to its limits, which is what we want to try to do to maximize performance, that we're seeing these areas of optimization.
So the context for this, why I'm super excited about this, is we talked about this like during a couple of like previous calls already. For example, when we're looking at the CF chat Cloudflare durable object example, here we are on the server side, like listening with a LiveStore client to updates that are happening. And the way how we currently do that is by having a query that just like listens for this table, and we subscribe to that query. However, what would be way more elegant to do here for incoming messages for a chat app is that we could do something like this directly, where we could say for like we're basically listening to particular kind of events where we're filtering for like some of the messages, etc., and then reacting to those events directly, like something like this. And this API here was stubbed, but was not actually implemented. So you see here is not yet implemented, but planned soon. Tons of people wanted access to this, but it wasn't there. Victor was one of those, and he is the change that he wants to see in the world and started working on it and has been making a ton of progress, and it was a true joy collaborating with him or working on this feature. So I'm very excited about this. Thanks a lot, Victor, to make this happen. And we will now move on to the next presentation from another amazing contributor, Igor, who has been working on the new React API for LiveStore.
Hey guys, there is a new API that is coming to LiveStore. It's been already in the experimental mode, like available for maybe a few weeks or so, or maybe even more, like maybe 2 months even, which is the multi-store API. So this is the current API at the moment when you're using LiveStore with React. You have the LiveStore provider component, and there you pass your store configuration, which has to include at least the schema, adapter, and also like the random props, so like the loading and error state. And then when you want to consume that store, you use the uStore hook, which gets us the store that's being provided by that component. And then from the store, you can query data in that store. So there is one store at the moment per app. We can't have multiple in them installed in a way that they don't like conflict with each other in the component tree. There is no also lifecycle management, like for loading, unloading store, like dynamically. And also it uses random props. So instead of like using like suspense or error boundaries. So what does all of this matter? What is the issue with this? So now let's say you want to support like partial synchronization. Browsers have like memory limits. And for an app like Linear, like an issue tracking app that has like hundreds of thousands of issue maybe, or maybe like an email client, that would be even more like an app that would have a lot of data to load in, can't fully load that data locally in the browser. So we have to segment to partition that data somehow. And then there is also like the multi-workspace apps where sometimes you like logged in into your team workspace. So then you like your open source workspace, like on Slack or Notion, and you want to like to switch between those different workspace and have all those data like isolated between each other. And so that's why we like introduced this new API. We want like to allow users like to be able to have multiple stores, which would help for both of these use cases. For partial synchronization, each store would be like your partition of data, and it would be like pretty much also the consistency boundary. And so the new API will allow for that. And those are like pretty much the overview of the API. We have store options, which is just a function that helps us define some store configuration that can be reused in multiple places across the app. There is the store registry class that is a class that will hold all your store instance and manage the caching for it, and also the cache eviction. And then we have a store registry provider. You only need to use one for the app. So you put that at the root of your application, and that will provide the store registry to the whole app. And then you will be able to register your store into that registry. But that will be done implicitly. We'll see that soon. And then you have this uStore hook, which is the same name than the current one, but the behavior is different. It accepts like some options, and those options are like the configuration for the store. And then there is the uStore registry, which allows you to get the registry directly so that you can do things like preloading. So I'm first going to show how it will work for like an app, like a simple app that has only one store with the new API. You have the store options here, API that I just mentioned. You pass the configuration like before, the schema adapter, but you also have to specify the store ID. Before it was like implicitly created like as default. Now we require it as explicitly because it's actually a pretty important concept in LiveStore. And then in the app at the root, as I just mentioned before, you have the store registry provider that you provide, and that you provide like the registry. And here you can put like some default configuration that we apply to our store instance. And then like in a component, somewhere in your app, you have uStore, where you pass those work store options that you created somewhere before in your app. And similar to before, you just query that store. So for a single store, doesn't change much here. The main thing that changes is that now the loading state and the error state are managed with the React suspense boundary and React error boundaries. That allows for like more composability of like loading and error state, and more flexibility on where you want to place those states in your app. They're like not directly tied to the provider, but you can decide where it makes more sense pretty much for the state to occur. Well, I skipped that, so I can go direct to the other one. So now this is for multiple store. We still have that workspace store like in the previous slide, but now I'm adding here a new store type, which will be for issues. So in my complex app here that has a lot of data, I decide like to split up all issues into different LiveStore stores. And here it's a function that receives an issue ID, so that we can actually, like a factory function, we can like construct here the store option using the issue ID. And here also configure like an unused cache time. By default, a store is kept like in memory after it's unused, meaning no components like subscribe to it. It's kept in store like for 30 seconds. Here I've set it like to 5 seconds intentionally because I'm using this issue store for like a list of issues. Imagine that list is like infinitely scrollable. I want like the issue store like to get evicted pretty quickly, like in 5 seconds, because 30 seconds, it could mean like way too many stores that are kept in memory. So that's why I'm giving like a low value here. And here you can see that I have uStore that now can accept as well as issue store options. And you can have many of those uStore across your app that sometimes we will use like the issue store, sometimes we'll use the workspace store. And the nice thing now with the suspense error boundaries, before like this loading state like will be tied directly to where you like the store like is initializing. Now, for instance, here, since it's not tied to the where the store is initialized, you can have like one loading state and one error state for the whole list instead to have like for each issue store. But you can also have for each store. That's the flexibility you have. Again, I forgot to do that. And so this is pretty much the stuff that I've just mentioned. So each store instance is fully isolated from each other. That's what I meant by like the consistency boundary. There is also automatic caching. So same store ID, if you use it like in multiple places, you have multiple use store for the same store ID, it will reuse that one. And then there is also the automatic memory eviction, which is configurable with that unused cache time that I showed previously. All right, so a quick demo on the repository of LiveStore. You can find this multi-store app on the examples. This only shows like some simple patterns of what the multi-store unlocks. So here, that's a single store, nothing complicated here. We have a workspace store. And then if I go directly to multi-instance, here we have like 3 parallel issue store. So they're all using the same use store, and they're loading like one side to each other in parallel, but all of them with their own loading state. And here we have a independent store. Like, so there's the workspace store here and an issue store here. And then in that workspace store, we have this issue store here that we can preload. So here, when I do just over here, we're not gonna see any loading state. It shows up directly because I actually preloaded it on hover. And now if we get out of the page, come back here, you can see there are no loading states. That's because they're all cached in the store registry. And as a quick example of that preloading that I just mentioned, here we have the code for like the pretty much this whole view here, which is a workspace store that we're using here, where we can like create an issue. So that create an issue which creates also an issue store, and then the preloading that I just showed here that's pretty much this function here where we preload, and we can even like overwrite the cache time so that we can have like a value that's more convenient to like this specific use case. So that's pretty much it. So the API is already available currently like on LiveStore React under like an experimental path, but it will replace like the current API in the upcoming 0.4 release. But feedback is always appreciated. If you have used it before, or if you're looking to use it and something that's not clear that we could make it more clear, please just reach out, send a message on Discord. We're always here always open to feedback. Thank you, guys.
This is amazing. Fantastic work, Igor. It's been really fun working with you on this for the past couple of weeks, and I'm really excited how it's coming out. I think it kind of gives you the best of both worlds in that regard, that Suspense is like a React API that is more like used for very async things. And for LiveStore, there's one async thing, which is like the initial opening of the store. And from there on, every query is resolved synchronously. So I think it gives you the best of both worlds, where you have like your async boundaries where you work with multiple stores, but everything is synchronous from there onwards, and you can like compose it in a very React idiomatic way. So very excited about this. I think it addresses like a whole group of like common points of feedback that we've gotten over the months. So very, very cool work. And Nicholas, thanks so much for your wonderful work on the new LiveStore tutorial.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, I want to give a quick overview of how this tutorial even came about. Because a couple of weeks ago, I set out to build an app, and I wanted to build it in a local first way. I've been chatting with Johannes about LiveStore a lot, wanted to use it, and I kind of dove into these getting started examples. And now I would call myself a mediocre developer. I'm not a super experienced engineer. I have some good foundations, and I found the getting started projects here somewhat overwhelming in terms of all the stuff that was going on and that was happening in there. So what I did, I kind of peeled off all the layers, all the noise that actually wasn't part of the core of the functionality, and came down to the minimum and then rebuild it back up. And then, because for me, teaching is always the best way of learning, I wanted to write a tutorial about this process, about building a LiveStore app really step by step and from the ground up. And I chatted with Johannes, and then we said it would be a good idea to add this kind of a tutorial to the LiveStore docs. So this really is a tutorial that's all about education and teaching you the fundamental concepts and workflows of LiveStore. If you really just want to get started quickly, you don't really bother about all the explanations, then you can use the starter project instead. And essentially the 6 chapters that I've written here follow these steps here. So we are first setting up just a plain React project with Vite and Tailwind. And the important part here is, and here I'll go through the tutorial, I just like do a quick walkthrough of everything. So that's the UI of the app, and it's implemented in a way that every React developer will be able to relate to, because it's just using local state. Everything is stored in local state, but that also means, of course, that when we refresh the app or restart the server, then all the data vanishes that we've added. So throughout the tutorial, we're gradually going to introduce LiveStore and replacing this local React state with a persisting LiveStore state. We also deploy the app to Cloudflare using Cloudflare as a sync backend. So here is a step that just has the instructions for doing that. And in chapter 3, we're getting to the meat of the tutorial where we are actually introducing LiveStore, installing all of the dependencies, creating our first LiveStore schema, our first events, and then also the LiveStore worker that's needed for the syncing. We're setting up the adapter and the LiveStore provider. This is the one that's going to transition into the multi-store API that Igor just showed. And then we're replacing our React code, the state that we're using here, the local React state, with LiveStore queries. That's the first part. Here's what it looks like. We can now refresh the to-dos afterwards, and they persist. If we deploy, we actually get the same benefit of being able to run multiple browsers and seeing the syncing happening at the same time as well. Then we introduced the sync backend, where we're using a durable object from Cloudflare, integrating it with LiveStore, and configuring the regular TOML, which you can replace with Alchemy. I feel like this tutorial is already outdated with the single store API and with regular TOML. So many better options already that we've just seen in this call. And then we're also expanding the business logic by adding the option to complete a to-do. We're adding this function of toggling a to-do that's being triggered. So this is the UI that we're building for that. And then finally, we are also introducing a client document. So first, just a UI element to render tabs here. So we've got this, and then we replace the use state with a use client document in our React code to make this more readable. And then I also went on to take this basic app that I've built there and evolved it in 2 different ways. So one, I've built a syncing demo on top of it, where I introduce a Node.js server that's syncing to Cloudflare, and then also an auth demo. And you can find these on my GitHub repository here. All right, Johannes, thank you so much for hosting me here.
Thank you so much for presenting. I know you got to jump now, but thanks so much for all of your work and for presenting it here. Really fantastic work. I think it's going to help people a ton. Overall, we are also at time. I will share a few more things that I'm very excited about before we're wrapping up. So those are just some ongoing things that are currently in development mainly driven through external contributions, that I'm very, very excited about. I mentioned the Svelte integration together with Elliot and Rich, but there's also some ongoing contributions to overhaul the solid integration for LiveStore. Additionally to supporting multiple stores, LiveStore instances, for example, in React, which the same pattern will be adopted also by Solid and Svelte. There is a new pattern that we've been also thinking about for quite a long time. And now Andrew from the community has stepped up to start working on supporting multiple state targets for LiveStore. This will be a much broader conversation, so I'll just tease it here. But right now, the event sourcing architecture of LiveStore is always materializing the events into SQLite. But in theory, we could have entirely different state targets than SQLite. So people have been asking, okay, how can you integrate LiveStore with XState, for example, or integrate LiveStore with like just having an arbitrary JavaScript update object kept up to date, etc. And this is what this work will unlock. So we'll hear more about that in the future. So I'm very, very excited about this. We saw Victor's work on the Events API. We also just heard that Nicholas, for example, is exploring new auth patterns. A lot of those things, I think, are kept coming up over the years as like hotly requested aspects, and I'm very, very excited that now together with the community we're working on it. And then also looking a little bit more into the future, there's 2 topics that are more like in a research stage where we're making good progress on. Igor has mentioned it, I think, in a previous office hours, where we want to now look into how can we bring the event sourcing architecture of LiveStore to the next level by supporting CQRS as a pattern by introducing a commands abstraction into LiveStore as well, and also to make it more scalable and address the like infinitely growing log of events through compaction. And so those are the topics that we're going to look into next. So with that out of the way, if you're interested in contributing in any way, whether docs, examples, helping with testing, extending LiveStore further, please get in touch. This is one of the things I'm most excited about in regards to LiveStore, is like how I'm able to help a small but growing group of contributors work on LiveStore, which I'm very happy about. So I don't think we have time for questions, so we'll cover those next time, hopefully with more time. But thank you so much for joining. The next office hours will be in 3 months. You can join here on this Luma link. If you use LiveStore and you enjoy using it, maybe consider sponsoring the project. But thank you so much. See you next time.